The crosshairs settled on the target, 847 yards away. Wind speed 12 knots from the northeast, temperature dropping as storm clouds gathered overhead. Through the scope, Cassandra Walker could see every detail of the man who was about to change history forever. His finger rested on the trigger of a high-powered rifle, his position perfectly concealed among the steel rafters of the abandoned warehouse, overlooking the Meridian Convention Center. In 3 seconds, he would fire. In 4 seconds, the President of the United States would be dead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But Cassandra Walker was no longer the broken woman who had failed sniper school twice. She was no longer the security guard everyone ignored, the former soldier whose career had been destroyed by lies and betrayal. In this moment, with the weight of the nation's future balanced on the edge of a single breath, she was exactly who she had always been meant to be. The shot that followed would echo through history, but the journey that brought her to this rooftop had begun 6 years earlier with a different kind of explosion, one that had shattered not glass and steel, but dreams and dignity. At 4:47 a.m., while most of Washington, D.C. still slept under a blanket of pre-dawn darkness, Cassandra Walker was already 3 miles into her daily run through the empty streets surrounding Fort Sterling Federal Training Facility. Her breathing remained steady despite the punishing pace, her military-issued running shoes striking the pavement with metronomic precision. The rhythm of her footsteps had become a meditation over the past 6 years, a way to drown out the voices that still whispered about her failures, about the catastrophic end to what should have been a legendary career. The security uniform she would don in an hour hung pressed and ready in her studio apartment at Riverside Apartments, a modest complex that housed mostly federal contractors and low-level government employees. The apartment itself was Spartan, containing only the essentials: a single bed, a small desk, a kitchen table that doubled as workspace, and a locked footlocker that held the only remnants of her former life. No photographs adorned the walls, no military memorabilia displayed on shelves. Cassandra had learned the art of invisibility, of existing without drawing attention to the woman she had once been. Sterling Security Services occupied a converted office building adjacent to the federal training facility, its gray concrete facade as unremarkable as the dozens of similar structures that dotted this section of Northern Virginia. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the controlled energy of professionals preparing for another day of protecting people who would never know their names. Cassandra arrived at precisely 6 a.m., her badge scan recording her punctuality for the 1,247th consecutive workday. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the faces of security personnel gathering for the morning shift change. Sergeant Louis Morales stood at the front of the room, his weathered face bearing the kind of authority that came from 22 years of military service and an understanding of what real leadership looked like. Unlike many supervisors in the private security world, Morales treated his team with the respect that came from recognizing competence over politics. "All right, people," Morales began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Today's assignment is what we've been preparing for all month. The President's campaign rally at the Meridian Convention Center, 15,000 expected attendees, media coverage from every major network, and security coordination with Secret Service, Capitol Police, and local law enforcement." Cassandra listened from her usual position in the back corner of the room, notepad in hand, recording details with the thoroughness that had made her one of Morales's most reliable team members. Over the past 6 years, she had worked everything from corporate board meetings to diplomatic receptions, building a reputation for competence and reliability that existed entirely separate from her past. Her colleagues knew her as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive assignments, who understood crowd dynamics and threat assessment with an intuition that seemed almost supernatural. What they didn't know was that Cassandra Walker had once been Staff Sergeant Cassandra Montgomery, the youngest woman ever accepted into the elite Presidential Protection Sniper Program. They didn't know that she had graduated at the top of her class from Fort Benning Sniper School, that she had completed 3 tours in Afghanistan with a confirmed kill record that remained classified 6 years later. They certainly didn't know that her dismissal from the Presidential Protection Program had been based on fabricated evidence and manipulated testimony, designed to protect a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. The footlocker in her apartment contained 3 items that connected her to that previous life: a tarnished marksman's badge that she had earned through blood and dedication, a photograph of her sniper team taken the day before their final mission in the Hindu Kush Mountains, and a commendation letter signed by General Patricia Kendall, then a colonel, praising Cassandra's performance during a hostage rescue operation that had saved the lives of 4 American diplomats. The letter's final line had proven prophetic. Staff Sergeant Montgomery possesses the rare combination of technical precision and moral courage that defines our finest warriors. That moral courage had ultimately cost her everything. The conspiracy that destroyed her career had its roots in Operation Mountain Thunder, a classified mission that was supposed to neutralize a high-value target in the remote mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban commander Rashid al-Mansouri was meeting with Iranian weapons dealers in a compound that intelligence assets had been monitoring for 3 months. The mission was straightforward. Cassandra's sniper team would provide overwatch while a special operations unit conducted the raid. What the mission briefing hadn't mentioned was that Colonel Vincent Sterling, the operations commanding officer, had been feeding information to al-Mansouri for 18 months in exchange for Swiss bank account deposits that would eventually total over $2 million. Sterling's network of corrupt officers had turned the mission into an elaborate trap, with Cassandra's team positioned to take the blame when everything went catastrophically wrong. The explosion that ended her career hadn't come from enemy fire. It had come from an improvised explosive device that Sterling's conspirators had planted in the compound, designed to eliminate evidence of their treason while creating a convenient scapegoat. The blast had killed 3 members of her 4-person team instantly, leaving Cassandra buried under rubble with a shattered left shoulder and trauma-induced amnesia that lasted for 6 weeks. When she finally regained consciousness in a military hospital in Germany, Cassandra found herself facing court-martial charges for dereliction of duty, failure to follow proper reconnaissance protocols, and reckless endangerment of her team. The evidence against her had been manufactured with military precision. Radio transcripts showing her ignoring direct orders, reconnaissance reports indicating she had failed to identify obvious security threats, and testimony from surviving special operations personnel who claimed she had been drinking the night before the mission. The truth had been buried beneath layers of classified documents and witness intimidation. Colonel Sterling and his network had spent months constructing an airtight case that painted Cassandra as a reckless soldier whose need for glory had gotten her team killed. The court-martial had been swift and merciless, resulting in her discharge from the military and permanent disqualification from any federal law enforcement position. Only General Patricia Kendall, who had been reassigned to European Command just days before the court-martial began, believed in Cassandra's innocence. But by the time Kendall could mount any kind of investigation, the evidence had been sealed under national security classifications that would take years to challenge through proper channels. 6 years later, Cassandra had built a new life from the ashes of the old one, legally changing her name and disappearing into the anonymous world of private security. She had learned to measure success differently, finding satisfaction in protection rather than politics, in competence rather than recognition. Every threat she identified, every potential security breach she prevented, was both penance and vindication for the team she couldn't save. The Sterling Security Services briefing continued with Sergeant Morales, outlining specific assignments for the presidential rally. Perimeter security, crowd control, media coordination, VIP protection, each role filled by personnel chosen for their specific skills and experience. When he reached Cassandra's assignment, his voice carried the tone of someone delivering news he knew would be appreciated. "Walker, you're on Executive Protection Detail with the Secret Service Coordination Team. Your job is to monitor sight lines and potential sniper positions around the convention center perimeter. Intelligence suggests minimal threat level, but we're not taking any chances with POTUS." The assignment sent a chill through Cassandra that had nothing to do with the air conditioning humming overhead. Working sniper overwatch again meant returning to skills she had spent 6 years trying to forget, to instincts that had been honed through years of training and combat experience. She would be analyzing ballistics, calculating wind drift and bullet drop, thinking like the kind of person she had once been trained to stop. "Copy that, Sergeant," she replied, her voice betraying none of the emotional turbulence churning beneath. The surface. "What's the threat assessment timeline?" "Full briefing at 00 with Secret Service Lead Agent Trevor Blackwood," Morales answered. "He's flying in from the Washington field office specifically for this event. Word is he's being considered for promotion to the Presidential Protection Detail, so expect everything to be by the book." The mention of Agent Blackwood's name triggered a memory that Cassandra had thought buried beyond recall. She had encountered Trevor Blackwood once before, during a joint training exercise at Fort Sterling 3 months before her deployment to Afghanistan. He had been a junior agent then, recently graduated from the Secret Service Academy and eager to prove himself worthy of assignment to the elite Presidential Protection Detail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What stood out most in Cassandra's memory about Blackwood was his dismissive attitude toward military personnel. During a past joint exercise, he had treated the Special Operations soldiers like glorified security guards, making crude remarks about jarheads and army grunts being unfit for the sophisticated demands of federal law enforcement. His most cutting comments had been aimed at the female soldiers, questioning whether women were capable of making high-pressure, split-second decisions. Cassandra had ignored his behavior at the time, staying focused on the mission and trusting that professionalism would eventually outweigh bias. Her 6 years operating in the shadows had taught her that men like Blackwood rarely changed. They just redirected their insecurity and masked their weaknesses by demeaning others they viewed as beneath them. As the current briefing ended and the team dispersed to their tasks, Cassandra packed her materials and prepared for a long day. The President's rally was set to start at 2 p.m., with security operations beginning at 8 a.m. That gave her 6 hours to evaluate every possible threat, to think like a sniper while blending in as just another private contractor doing her job. Sergeant Morales approached as she gathered her gear, his face showing the familiar mix of respect and quiet concern he'd shown throughout their 3-year working relationship. Louise Morales understood the unspoken truth that true expertise often came with personal sacrifice, and the best operators were often those who had paid the steepest price for their skills. "Walker," he said in a low voice, "I asked for you specifically on this assignment. Your eye for detail is unmatched, and your reports are always dead on. Don't let Blackwood mess with your head." The message was understated but clear. Morales had dealt with enough federal agents to recognize Blackwood's type, and he was known for protecting those under his command. Cassandra appreciated it, though she knew she'd weathered far worse than anything Blackwood could throw her way. "Understood, Sergeant. I'll stay mission-focused. That's what I like to hear. And Walker, trust your instincts. If anything seems off, speak up." Forget what anyone else says about threat levels or red tape. The president's life takes priority over anyone's ego. His words carried more meaning than just protocol. They were a reminder that real security work demanded moral courage, the willingness to challenge authority and speak out when lives were on the line. It was that very trait that had ended Cassandra's military career, and the same quality that now made her indispensable in her new role. As she made her way to the equipment room, she couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. Once court-martialed for allegedly failing to protect fellow soldiers, today she was responsible for safeguarding the highest profile American of all, working side by side with the same kind of federal agents who had once considered her unfit for service. The equipment room held an impressive array of gear: high-grade binoculars, tactical radios, body armor rated for rifle rounds, and tablets preloaded with building layouts and threat analysis tools. Cassandra selected her equipment with the same careful precision she'd used in her combat days, double-checking everything and preparing backups for anything critical. Her hands moved over the gear with instinctive ease, adjusting the optics with practiced efficiency. The muscle memory was still sharp, ready to resurface when performance mattered more than safety. Her radio came to life just as she finished her gear check, and Agent Blackwood's voice came through with a tone that suggested authority rooted more in politics than experience. He spoke with the kind of confidence found in those who had never paid the price for failure, men who advanced through connections and pedigree instead of tested capability. All security personnel, this is Agent Blackwood. Report to Conference Room C for the operational briefing in 15 minutes. And remember, folks, this isn't some county fair security detail. We're protecting the President of the United States, so let's try to look professional. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, a preview of what the day would bring for anyone he considered beneath his station. Cassandra had encountered his type countless times during her military career. Officers who confused rank with competence, who mistook political connections for tactical ability, who believed that mockery was an effective leadership tool. As she made her way toward Conference Room C, carrying equipment that represented her only connection to the life she had lost, Cassandra had no idea that the day would bring more than just another assignment. She had no idea that Agent Blackwood's arrogance would soon escalate into something far more dangerous than casual cruelty, or that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to collide with a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about survival, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. But first, she would have to endure the kind of public humiliation that men like Blackwood considered entertainment, never imagining that their casual cruelty might awaken skills that had been dormant for 6 years. The conference room was already filling with personnel when Cassandra arrived, the air thick with the tension that always preceded high-profile security operations. Secret Service agents in their characteristic dark suits clustered around tactical displays, while sterling security personnel took seats along the room's perimeter. The invisible line between federal and contract employees, as clear as if it had been painted on the floor. Agent Trevor Blackwood stood at the front of the room like a man born to command, his perfectly pressed suit and Harvard law degree creating an aura of authority that had carried him through 15 years of federal service. At 42, he represented everything that was both impressive and dangerous about modern law enforcement: intelligent enough to understand complex threats, politically connected enough to avoid accountability, and arrogant enough to believe that competence was less important than connections. As the briefing began, Cassandra took her position in the back corner of the room, notepad ready, observing not just the tactical information being presented but the dynamics between the various security agencies represented. She had learned to read these situations like a sniper reads wind patterns, understanding that personal politics often mattered more than operational reality when it came to mission success or failure. The day that would change everything was about to begin, though none of them knew it yet. In a few hours, Cassandra Walker would be forced to choose between the safety of shadows and the dangerous light of truth, between the comfortable anonymity she had built and the terrible responsibility that came with being exactly who she had always been meant to be. The presidential rally at the Meridian Convention Center would become the stage for more than political theater. It would become the crucible where buried skills would resurface, where hidden truths would be revealed, and where the fine line between justice and revenge would be tested by a single shot that would echo through history. Conference room C had then transformed into a tactical command center that would have impressed most military planners. Wall-mounted displays showed detailed schematics of the Meridian Convention Center, surrounding streets marked with color-coded threat assessments, and real-time satellite imagery that updated every 30 seconds. The technology represented millions of dollars in federal investment, but Cassandra knew from hard experience that the most sophisticated equipment meant nothing without competent people operating it. Agent Trevor Blackwood commanded the room's attention with the effortless authority of someone who had never faced serious opposition to his plans. His presentation style combined Ivy League polish with federal bureaucracy, each slide transition, accompanied by commentary that reminded everyone present of his credentials and connections. The wall behind him displayed his educational pedigree like a medieval coat of arms: Harvard Law, FBI National Academy, Secret Service Advanced Training, and a list of commendations that read more like political endorsements than operational achievements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to briefing important audiences, "today's operation represents the pinnacle of federal security coordination. We have agents from 4 different agencies, contractors from 3 private firms, and local law enforcement support that extends from the Virginia State Police to the Washington Metropolitan Police Department." Cassandra listened from her position along the back wall, noting the subtle hierarchies that Blackwood established through his seating arrangements and speaking order. Secret Service agents occupied the front rows, their dark suits and serious expressions projecting federal authority. Behind them sat representatives from various law enforcement agencies, each group clustered according to their perceived importance in the day's operation. Private security contractors like herself were relegated to standing positions along the walls, present but clearly considered supplementary to the real work being done by federal personnel. The briefing continued with detailed analysis of potential threat vectors, each possibility examined through the lens of federal law, enforcement protocols that had been refined over decades of protecting high-value targets. Vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, lone wolf shooters, coordinated terrorist attacks, domestic extremist groups, each threat category received thorough examination, complete with statistical analysis and historical precedents that demonstrated the depth of planning behind presidential security operations. What impressed Cassandra most was not the thoroughness of the threat assessment, but the blind spots that federal thinking created in operational planning. The agents in the room were superbly trained to handle known threats, situations that fit established patterns and responded to conventional countermeasures. But 6 years of working private security had taught her that the most dangerous threats often came from directions that nobody expected, from people who understood how to exploit the assumptions that guided institutional thinking. The convention center perimeter has been divided into 8 security zones. Blackwood continued, activating a laser pointer that cast red dots across the tactical display. Each zone will be monitored by teams combining federal agents and contract security personnel, with overlapping fields of observation that ensure complete coverage of potential approach routes. The zone assignments reflected careful political calculation as much as tactical necessity. Senior Secret Service agents received the most prestigious positions, monitoring primary routes and VIP access points that would put them in contact with high-ranking officials. Junior agents and local law enforcement were assigned secondary perimeters, important but less visible positions that supported the overall security envelope without offering opportunities for career advancement. Contract security personnel like Cassandra found themselves assigned to the least glamorous but most tactically demanding positions, monitoring distant sightlines, analyzing crowd behavior patterns, and maintaining communication links that kept the entire operation connected. These assignments required exactly the kind of skills that federal agents often lacked the patience to develop, but they also positioned contractors to observe threats that might escape the attention of agents focused on more immediate concerns. Zone 7 will be monitoring elevated positions within a 1,000-yard radius of the convention center, Blackwood announced, his laser pointer highlighting a series of buildings that surrounded the target area. This includes office towers, parking garages, and construction sites that could potentially provide concealment for long-range threats. Cassandra felt her pulse quicken as the assignment implications became clear. Zone 7 was Sniper Overwatch, the position that required understanding ballistics, wind patterns, and the psychology of long-range shooters. It was exactly the kind of assignment that would test skills she had spent 6 years trying to forget, while exposing her to federal agents who might recognize competence that exceeded her official qualifications. Agent Morrison will be team leader for Zone 7, Blackwood continued, indicating a young Secret Service agent whose nervous energy suggested this was his first major protection assignment. He'll be supported by Detective Sullivan from Metro Police and Walker from Sterling Security. The casual way Blackwood mentioned her name betrayed his complete lack of interest in contract personnel, treating them as interchangeable resources rather than professionals with specific skills and experience. It was exactly the kind of attitude that created vulnerabilities in security operations, blind spots that came from underestimating people who didn't fit conventional categories. Agent Morrison stood when his assignment was announced, his movement revealing the kind of eager professionalism that characterized young federal agents, determined to prove themselves worthy of promotion. At 28, he represented the new generation of Secret Service personnel, technically competent, politically aware, and absolutely convinced that federal training programs had prepared him for any situation he might encounter. Sir, Morrison addressed Blackwood with the deference that junior agents showed their superiors. What specific protocols should we follow for threat identification and response in Zone 7? The question revealed both Morrison's conscientiousness and his inexperience. Veteran agents understood that protocols were guidelines, not scripture, and that real security work required the flexibility to adapt procedures to unexpected circumstances. But Morrison's training had emphasized following established procedures, and his question demonstrated the kind of by-the-book thinking that could be either an asset or a liability, depending on the situation. Standard escalation procedures, Blackwood replied dismissively. Visual confirmation, radio report, coordinate with tactical response team. Nothing complicated, Agent Morrison. We're dealing with a campaign rally, not a war zone. The casual dismissal of potential threats bothered Cassandra more than she expected. 6 years of private security work had taught her that complacency was the deadliest enemy of any protection operation, that the moment security personnel began assuming nothing would happen was exactly when something inevitably did. Blackwood's attitude suggested the kind of overconfidence that came from too many uneventful assignments and insufficient respect for the creativity of people who wanted to cause harm. As the briefing moved through equipment assignments and communication protocols, Cassandra found herself analyzing the operation from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The federal approach was comprehensive and well-funded, but it relied heavily on technology and established procedures that might not adapt quickly to unexpected developments. The local law enforcement support was enthusiastic, but potentially overwhelmed by the complexity of federal security requirements. The private Security contractors possessed practical experience, but lacked access to intelligence resources that might identify emerging threats. The combination created a security envelope that was both impressively robust and potentially brittle, capable of handling conventional threats, but vulnerable to anyone clever enough to identify the gaps between different agencies and operational philosophies. It was exactly the kind of situation that required vigilance rather than assumption, preparation for possibilities that didn't appear in federal threat assessment manuals. Equipment distribution will begin at 0900, Blackwood announced as the briefing moved toward conclusion. Each team will receive tactical radios, threat assessment tablets, and emergency response gear appropriate to their assignment. Remember, people, the eyes of the nation will be on this operation. Let's make sure we give them something to be proud of. The patriotic flourish at the end of his remarks was typical Blackwood, combining genuine sentiment with calculated political awareness. He understood that successful security operations enhanced careers while failures ended them, and his comment revealed the personal stakes that motivated his attention to detail as much as any dedication to public service. As personnel began dispersing to their various preparation activities, Cassandra gathered her materials and prepared to meet her Zone 7 teammates. The prospect of working closely with federal agents for an extended period created complications. She had spent 6 years avoiding opportunities for her background to be examined by people trained to notice inconsistencies in cover stories. Agent Morrison approached her near the conference room exit, his expression combining professional courtesy with the kind of curiosity that young agents developed about anyone operating outside their usual circles. His handshake was firm but brief, the gesture of someone who had been trained to maintain appropriate professional distance from contract personnel. "Ms. Walker," he said, consulting a tablet that contained her basic personnel file, "I see you've been with Sterling Security for 3 years, mostly working corporate events and diplomatic receptions. This is your first presidential protection assignment." The question was routine, but potentially dangerous, an opportunity for inconsistencies to emerge between her official background and the depth of knowledge she would inevitably display. During the day's operations, Cassandra had prepared answers for these situations, explanations that accounted for her competence without revealing its true source. "That's correct, Agent Morrison. I've been working my way up through different assignment levels, building experience with higher profile events. Sergeant Morales felt I was ready for this kind of responsibility." "Good to hear," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested the kind of polite skepticism that federal agents maintained toward private security personnel. "I'm sure you understand that presidential protection requires a different level of precision than corporate work. We'll need to coordinate very closely to ensure our observations complement rather than overlap." The comment revealed Morrison's assumption that private contractors needed federal guidance to perform competently, an attitude that was both insulting and tactically dangerous. Effective security operations required trust and communication between all team members, not hierarchical relationships that discouraged information sharing from lower status personnel. "Understood," Cassandra replied simply, recognizing that arguing with federal assumptions would only create problems without changing attitudes. "I'm here to support the mission however you think best." Detective Kevin Sullivan from the Metropolitan Police Department joined their conversation as they moved toward the equipment distribution area, his presence adding a third perspective to their emerging team dynamic. At 45, Sullivan represented the kind of street-smart law enforcement experience that federal agents often lacked, practical knowledge gained through years of dealing with real criminals in unpredictable situations. "Walker," Sullivan said, extending a hand that bore the calluses of someone who had worked with his hands before joining law enforcement. "Luis Morales speaks very highly of your work. Says you've got the best eye for detail he's ever seen in private security." The endorsement from Morales carried weight with Sullivan, who had worked enough joint operations to recognize competence regardless of which agency employed it. His comment also revealed the informal networks that connected law enforcement professionals across institutional boundaries, relationships built on mutual respect rather than bureaucratic hierarchy. "Sergeant Morales is generous with his praise," Cassandra replied, though she appreciated the validation more than she expected. "I try to pay attention to things that might matter." "That's exactly what we need today," Sullivan continued. "Federal agents are great with protocols and procedures, but sometimes the most important threats are the ones that don't fit standard patterns. Street cops learn to trust their instincts about when something doesn't feel right." The observation contained wisdom that Cassandra had learned through bitter experience in Afghanistan. Military operations succeeded or failed based on the ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances, to recognize patterns that deviated from established norms, and to act decisively when institutional procedures proved inadequate to emerging threats. Agent Morrison's expression suggested mild discomfort with Sullivan's comments, the kind of reaction that young federal agents displayed when local law enforcement questioned the supremacy of federal training and procedures. His response revealed the institutional pride that could be either a strength or a weakness depending on the situation. "I'm sure our threat assessment protocols are comprehensive enough to identify any significant risks," Morrison said carefully. "Federal security operations are based on decades of experience protecting high-value targets in every conceivable environment." Sullivan's smile contained the patient amusement of an experienced cop listening to academy theory being presented as operational reality. His response demonstrated the diplomatic skills that veteran local officers developed when working with federal agencies that possessed superior resources, but sometimes lacked practical wisdom. "No doubt about it, Agent Morrison. Federal training is impressive, but every situation is unique, and sometimes the most dangerous threats come from directions nobody anticipated. That's why they put 3 different perspectives on each team." The comment diffused potential tension while making a larger point about the value of diverse experience in security operations. Cassandra appreciated Sullivan's diplomatic skills, recognizing in him the kind of professional competence that transcended institutional boundaries and focused on mission success rather than bureaucratic politics. As they reached the equipment distribution area, the sight of tactical gear laid out on military-style tables triggered memories that Cassandra had worked hard to suppress. High-powered binoculars, encrypted communication devices, body armor, rated for rifle rounds, night vision equipment, each item represented technology that she had used in combat situations where failure meant death rather than career embarrassment. The equipment sergeant, a retired Marine whose bearing suggested decades of military service, handed each team member a tactical radio programmed with the day's encryption codes and communication protocols. His brief equipment briefing covered frequency assignments, emergency procedures, and backup communication systems with the thoroughness of someone who understood that small failures in communication often led to large failures in operations. "Channel 7 is your primary frequency," the sergeant explained, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from experience rather than rank. "Channel 1 is command net, Channel 3 is medical emergency, Channel 9 is tactical. Response coordination. Your radios will automatically record all transmissions for post-operation analysis." Cassandra tested her radio's functions with practiced efficiency, checking battery levels, signal strength, and backup frequency access. With movements that revealed more familiarity with tactical communication equipment than her official background would suggest. The muscle memory was still there, intact despite 6 years of suppression, waiting to be called upon when duty demanded excellence over safety. Agent Morrison noticed her competence with the equipment, his expression shifting from polite professionalism to genuine curiosity. Federal agents were trained to observe behavioral patterns that might indicate deception or concealed capabilities. and Cassandra's movements suggested experience that exceeded her personnel file. "You seem very comfortable with tactical communication." "Gear," Morrison observed, his tone carefully neutral but clearly fishing for additional information. "Most private security contractors need more familiarization time with federal equipment." The observation was both compliment and challenge, an opportunity for Cassandra to provide additional background information that might explain her competence without revealing its true source. She had prepared answers for these situations, explanations that accounted for her skills without creating investigative interest in her past. "Military background," she replied simply. "Army Reserve, mostly logistics and communication support." "You develop familiarity with standard equipment pretty quickly when your weekend drills involve real gear instead of classroom theory." The explanation was carefully crafted to be both true and misleading, providing a plausible source for her competence without inviting detailed questions about specific units or deployments. Army Reserve service was common enough among private security personnel to avoid suspicion, but boring enough to discourage follow-up inquiries from federal agents focused on more immediate concerns. "Makes sense," Morrison replied, though his expression suggested he was filing the information away for potential future reference. "Military experience is always valuable in security work. Different perspective on risk assessment and operational planning." Detective Sullivan's knowing smile suggested that he recognized the careful dance of information control that occurred whenever people with hidden backgrounds worked together on sensitive operations. His years in law enforcement had taught him that everyone carried secrets, and that successful operations required focusing on present competence rather than past mysteries. As they completed their equipment checks and prepared to move to their assigned positions, Cassandra felt the familiar weight of tactical gear settling into place. The radio on her belt, the binoculars around her neck, the tactical vest with its various pouches and attachment points, each item represented a return to skills and responsibilities that she had thought permanently buried. The morning sun was climbing higher as they emerged from the federal building, casting sharp shadows across the parking lot where various security teams were conducting final equipment checks and coordination meetings. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, the kind of controlled energy that characterized well-planned operations with minimal expected threats. Agent Blackwood stood near a convoy of black SUVs, conducting a final briefing with senior agents, who would be coordinating the day's operations from the mobile command center. His gestures were expansive and confident, the movements of someone who had never experienced the kind of catastrophic failure that taught humility to those who survived it. As Cassandra watched Blackwood's performance, she recognized in him the same dangerous combination of competence and arrogance that had characterized Colonel Sterling, the officer whose betrayal had cost her everything 6 years earlier. Both men possessed the intelligence and training to understand complex operations, but both also suffered from the kind of institutional blindness that came from never having their assumptions challenged by reality. The similarity was unsettling, enough to trigger memories that Cassandra had worked hard to suppress, reminders of how quickly professional confidence could transform into professional catastrophe when the people in charge valued politics over truth. She forced herself to focus on the present mission, on the specific responsibilities that would occupy her attention for the next several hours. Zone 7's assignment area encompassed a complex urban environment that stretched for nearly a mile around the Meridian Convention Center, including office buildings, parking structures, construction sites, and residential areas that could potentially provide concealment for long-range threats. The tactical challenge was significant. Too many potential positions to monitor comprehensively, too many variables to control completely, too many opportunities for someone with patience and planning to exploit. As their small team moved toward their assigned observation post, Cassandra found herself automatically analyzing sightlines and ballistic considerations with skills that had been honed through years of combat experience. Wind patterns, building heights, construction materials, traffic flow, each factor contributed to threat assessment calculations that occurred below the level of conscious thought. The day that would change everything was beginning in earnest, though none of them understood yet that they were walking into a situation far more dangerous than any federal threat assessment had anticipated. In a few hours, the careful plans and professional confidence of Agent Blackwood's operation would collide with reality in ways that would test everyone's assumptions about competence, courage, and the true meaning of service under pressure. The observation post for Zone 7 occupied the 10th floor of the Hartwell Financial Building, a glass and steel monument to corporate success that provided commanding views of the Meridian Convention Center 6 blocks away. The office space had been evacuated for security purposes, leaving behind empty cubicles and abandoned coffee cups that spoke to the disruption presidential visits caused in ordinary lives. Florida's ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the surrounding urban landscape, but they also created tactical challenges that made Cassandra's military training reassert itself despite her efforts to remain in the background. Agent Morrison had claimed the central observation position with the confidence of someone who believed federal training had prepared him for any contingency. His tactical binoculars were top-of-the-line equipment, paired with a tablet computer that could calculate range, wind speed, and ballistic trajectories with the touch of a screen. The technology was impressive, but Cassandra noticed that Morrison was using it like a tourist with an expensive camera, focused on the mechanical aspects of observation rather than the intuitive understanding that separated competent watchers from dangerous ones. Detective Sullivan had positioned himself near the eastern windows, his attention focused on the residential neighborhoods that stretched beyond the immediate security perimeter. His approach reflected street cop instincts about where trouble usually originated, understanding that the most dangerous threats often came from directions that looked least threatening to people trained in conventional security protocols. Sullivan's binoculars were older and less sophisticated than Morrison's, but his scanning pattern revealed the kind of systematic thoroughness that came from years of actually looking for people who didn't want to be found. Cassandra had accepted the Western Observation Area without comment, positioning herself where she could monitor the industrial district that included warehouses, construction sites, and abandoned buildings that offered both concealment and elevated positions within sniper range of the convention center. The assignment put her in the position of greatest tactical responsibility while maintaining the appearance that she was simply filling the least desirable observation post. What none of her teammates understood was that the western sector contained exactly the kind of terrain that military snipers were trained to exploit. The abandoned warehouse district offered multiple concealed positions, complex approach routes, and escape corridors that could allow a determined shooter to establish position and withdraw before conventional security forces could respond effectively. It was exactly the kind of operational environment that Cassandra had studied extensively during her military service, both as someone trained to use such terrain and someone trained to deny it to enemies. The tactical radio crackled with routine communications as various security teams conducted final preparations for the presidential arrival. Status reports, equipment checks, and coordination updates filled the airwaves with the comfortable chatter of professionals going through familiar procedures. The tone was relaxed and confident, exactly what Cassandra would have expected from a well-planned operation with minimal anticipated threats. Agent Blackwood's voice dominated the command frequency with updates that seemed designed more to demonstrate his control of the operation than to convey necessary information. His communication style reflected the political awareness that had advanced his career, each transmission carefully crafted to sound authoritative while avoiding the kind of specific commitments that could later be used to assign blame if anything went wrong. Command to all stations. Blackwood's voice emerged from their radios with practiced authority. POTUS arrival is confirmed for 30 and 45 hours. All security zones report final status and readiness levels. The responses came in numerical order, each team leader providing brief confirmation that their assigned areas were secure and their personnel were in position. The routine nature of the communications reinforced the general assumption that the day would proceed without significant incident. Another successful security operation that would enhance careers and validate federal protective procedures. When Zone 7's turn came, Morrison responded with the kind of precise professionalism that characterized young federal agents, determined to prove their competence to superior officers. His report covered personnel deployment, equipment status, and initial threat assessment with textbook thoroughness that would have earned high marks in any training exercise. Zone 7 operational, Morrison announced. 3 personnel deployed. All equipment functional. Initial sweep negative for observable threats. Zone 7 ready. The response was technically accurate, but revealed Morrison's inexperience with real-world threat assessment. His report focused on the absence of obvious threats rather than the presence of potential vulnerabilities. Exactly the kind of thinking that created gaps in security coverage. Cassandra bit back the urge to suggest additional considerations, understanding that offering tactical advice would only draw unwanted attention to her background. As the morning progressed toward the presidential arrival time, the rhythm of communications shifted from preparation to active monitoring. Security teams began reporting on crowd movements, traffic patterns, and the dozens of small anomalies that characterized any large public event. Most reports were routine observations that required no action, but they created a baseline of normal activity against which genuine threats could be identified. Cassandra found herself slipping into observation patterns that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of sniper training. Her scanning technique was systematic and thorough, covering assigned sectors with overlapping sweeps that ensured no area went unobserved for more than 30 seconds. Her hands moved over her binoculars with unconscious precision, adjusting focus and magnification with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years looking for people who didn't want to be found. The warehouse district spread below her position like a tactical puzzle waiting to be solved. Multiple buildings offered elevated positions within effective rifle range of the convention center. Construction sites provided both concealment and elevated platforms that could be accessed without using normal building entrances. Abandoned structures created opportunities for pre-positioned equipment and escape routes that would be difficult for conventional security forces to cover comprehensively. Most concerning was the Meridian Industrial Complex, a partially demolished warehouse facility that had been under reconstruction for the past 8 months. Construction scaffolding and crane towers created a maze of potential sniper positions that would be nearly impossible to clear completely, while ongoing work provided cover for anyone who understood how to blend with legitimate construction activity. Agent Morrison's voice interrupted her tactical analysis with the kind of casual conversation that federal agents used to fill quiet periods during long operations. His tone was friendly but carried the undertone of someone testing boundaries and gathering information about colleagues whose backgrounds might contain interesting details. "Walker," Morrison said, lowering his binoculars and turning toward her position, "that's some pretty serious scanning technique you've got there. Military training really shows when people know what they're doing." The comment was both compliment and probe, an invitation for Cassandra to provide additional details about her background, while acknowledging competence that exceeded normal private security levels. She had encountered similar fishing expeditions countless times over the past 6 years. Federal agents and law enforcement personnel who recognized skills that didn't match official qualifications. "Army Reserve taught me to pay attention to details," she replied without taking her eyes off the observation area. "Different perspective on what might matter in security situations." "Must have been interesting work," Morrison continued, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than professional suspicion. Reserve units see some pretty diverse assignments these days. Communications, logistics, even some specialized training programs. The follow-up question revealed Morrison's intelligence-gathering instincts. His attempt to narrow down her military background through casual conversation. Federal agents were trained to extract information through seemingly innocent discussions. And Morrison was demonstrating textbook technique for profiling colleagues whose credentials might warrant additional scrutiny. Detective Sullivan's amused chuckle from across the room suggested that he recognized the interrogation technique and found Morrison's approach entertainingly obvious. His years in law enforcement had exposed him to every variety of information gathering, and his intervention demonstrated the kind of protective instincts that veteran cops develop toward people they respected. "Agent Morrison," Sullivan said with barely concealed amusement, "maybe we should focus on watching for bad guys instead of conducting background interviews. Walker's doing fine work over there, and her resume is none of our business as long as she spots threats when they matter." Morrison's expression showed mild embarrassment at having his technique identified so directly, but his response revealed the kind of professional flexibility that would serve him well if he survived long enough to gain real experience. Young federal agents who couldn't adapt to criticism usually found themselves reassigned to desk jobs, while those who learned from veteran colleagues sometimes developed into competent field operatives. "You're absolutely right, Detective Sullivan," Morrison replied with genuine humility. "Sorry, Walker. Occupational hazard of federal service, I guess. We tend to overthink everything." The apology was gracefully delivered and professionally appropriate, suggesting that Morrison possessed the kind of character that could overcome the arrogance that federal training sometimes instilled in young agents. Cassandra appreciated his willingness to acknowledge his mistake, recognizing in him the potential for growth that separated future leaders from career bureaucrats. "No offense taken," she replied simply. "Questions are part of security work. I'd rather work with someone who's curious than someone who isn't paying attention." The diplomatic response diffused any remaining tension while reinforcing her commitment to the mission over personal comfort. It was exactly the kind of answer that competent professionals gave when dealing with institutional politics, acknowledging legitimate concerns while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Their radio crackled with an update from the mobile command center that shifted everyone's attention back to immediate operational concerns. Agent Blackwood's voice carried the kind of controlled excitement that characterized federal agents when high-profile events proceeded according to plan, validation of their training and procedures. "All stations, POTUS motorcade is 20 minutes. Out. Final security sweeps and readiness checks. Command wants confirmation that all observation posts are maintaining active surveillance." The announcement triggered a flurry of communications as various security teams provided updates on their status and observations. The professional tone remained calm and confident, but Cassandra detected the subtle tension that always preceded moments when theoretical planning met practical reality. Zone 7's final sweep revealed nothing unusual in the conventional sense. No obvious weapons, no suspicious individuals, no vehicles parked in locations that violated security protocols. Morrison's report to command reflected exactly what federal training had taught him to look for, covering all the standard threat categories with thoroughness that would satisfy any supervisory review. But Cassandra's more experienced eye caught details that troubled her in ways she couldn't yet articulate. Construction activity at the Meridian Industrial Complex had been unusually light for a Tuesday morning, despite work schedules that normally involved multiple crews and heavy equipment operations. A white panel van parked near the construction site entrance had been in the same position for over an hour, its occupants invisible behind tinted windows that prevented identification. Most concerning was a pattern of movement she had observed. In the residential area east of the industrial complex, 3 different individuals had walked the same route at 20-minute intervals, each one appearing to conduct casual reconnaissance of approach routes to the construction site. The pattern was subtle enough to escape notice from anyone not specifically trained to recognize surveillance behavior, but obvious enough to trigger alarms for someone with military intelligence experience. The tactical problem was that none of these observations constituted evidence of criminal activity or immediate threat. Federal security protocols required specific criteria for threat escalation, evidence that would justify tactical response and potential disruption of the presidential event. Cassandra's concerns were based on intuitive pattern recognition rather than concrete intelligence, exactly the kind of soft information that institutional procedures were designed to filter out. Detective Sullivan's voice provided welcome interruption to her internal debate about whether to voice concerns that might be dismissed as paranoid speculation from an overqualified private contractor. His tone carried the kind of professional alertness that suggested he had also noticed something that didn't feel quite right. Anyone else seeing unusual activity patterns in their sectors? Sullivan asked, his question carefully phrased to invite discussion without committing to specific allegations. Nothing obviously threatening, but maybe worth keeping extra attention on. Morrison's response revealed his inexperience with the kind of ambiguous situations that characterized real security work. Federal training emphasized clear threat categories and established response procedures, leaving young agents poorly prepared for the gray areas where most genuine threats actually developed. "I'm not seeing anything that meets threat identification criteria," Morrison replied, consulting his tablet computer as if technology could resolve questions that required human judgment. "Crowd patterns are normal, vehicle traffic is within expected parameters, no observable weapons or suspicious behavior." Sullivan's knowing look toward Cassandra suggested that he recognized a kindred spirit in someone who understood that the most dangerous threats often appeared completely normal until the moment they revealed themselves. His follow-up question demonstrated the diplomatic skills that veteran law enforcement officers used to gather information without triggering defensive responses. "Walker, you've got eyes on the industrial area. Anything catch your attention over there?" The question created exactly the kind of opportunity that Cassandra had been hoping to avoid, forcing her to choose between voicing concerns that might reveal her background and remaining silent about observations that could be tactically significant. Her decision would determine whether the day proceeded according to federal assumptions or whether someone would investigate the patterns that were beginning to crystallize in her mind. "There's been some unusual activity at the Meridian Industrial Complex," she said carefully, choosing words that conveyed concern without overstating evidence. "Construction work has been lighter than normal, and I've observed what might be surveillance activity in the surrounding residential area." Morrison's expression shifted from polite attention to professional skepticism, his federal training asserting itself in ways that could either enhance or compromise their collective security effectiveness. His response would reveal whether he possessed the flexibility to consider information that didn't fit established threat assessment categories. "Can you be more specific about what constitutes unusual activity?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting that he was prepared to dismiss concerns that couldn't be quantified according to federal standards. "We need concrete observations that justify escalating threat levels." The request for specificity was reasonable from a federal perspective, but it revealed Morrison's lack of understanding about how real threats actually developed. Military experience had taught Cassandra that the most dangerous enemies were those who understood security procedures well, enough to operate within the gaps between official threat categories. 3 individuals conducting what appears to be reconnaissance of approach routes to the construction site, she replied, maintaining professional tone while providing details that might satisfy federal requirements. "A white panel van that's been stationary for over an hour with unidentified occupants. Construction activity that's significantly below normal levels for this time of day." Detective Sullivan's expression showed the kind of professional interest that experienced cops developed when someone provided information that connected seemingly unrelated observations into potentially significant patterns. His years of street experience had taught him that seemingly innocent details often acquired meaning when viewed as parts of larger puzzles. "That's worth checking out," Sullivan said, reaching for his radio with the decisive movement of someone who understood that security work sometimes required acting on incomplete information. "I'll request a patrol unit to conduct a drive-by of the industrial area, see if they can identify the van occupants." Morrison's hesitation was visible as he weighed the potential consequences of escalating threat levels based on observations that might prove irrelevant. Federal agents learned early in their careers that unnecessary alerts could damage reputations more than missed threats, creating institutional pressure to avoid actions that might later be criticized as overreactions. "Let's think about this carefully," Morrison said, his tone reflecting the caution that federal training instilled regarding unconfirmed threat reports. "We don't want to trigger unnecessary tactical responses based on activity that might have innocent explanations." The comment revealed the institutional blindness that Cassandra had observed throughout her military career, the tendency for bureaucratic organizations to prioritize avoiding embarrassment over preventing catastrophes. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had allowed Colonel Sterling's conspiracy to flourish, while genuine concerns were dismissed as paranoid speculation. Sullivan's response demonstrated the different perspective that street cops brought to security work, understanding that the cost of being wrong about threats far exceeded the cost of investigating suspicious activity that proved harmless. His decision would determine whether their observations received appropriate attention or disappeared into federal bureaucracy. "Better safe than sorry," Sullivan said firmly, keying his radio with the authority of someone who had learned to trust professional instincts over institutional procedures. "Metro 7 to dispatch, requesting patrol unit for area check. Meridian Industrial Complex, possible surveillance activity." The radio transmission committed their team to a course of action that would either validate their concerns or expose them to criticism for wasting resources on false alarms. Morrison's expression showed his discomfort with the decision, but he made no attempt to countermand Sullivan's request, recognizing that local law enforcement had jurisdiction over preliminary investigations. Cassandra felt a familiar tension building as their observations moved from private concern to official action, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether their team maintained its current assignments or found itself reassigned to less critical positions. Federal security operations had little tolerance for personnel who generated unnecessary complications, but even less tolerance for those who missed genuine threats. The presidential motorcade was now 15 minutes away, approaching the point where any significant security concerns would require immediate resolution or acceptance of increased risk levels. The timing created pressure for quick decisions based on incomplete information. Exactly the kind of situation where training and experience either proved their value or revealed their limitations. Agent Blackwood's voice emerged from their radios with an update that added new urgency to their developing situation, his tone reflecting the kind of controlled tension that characterized federal operations when theoretical planning began encountering practical complications. "All stations, advance team reports minor protest activity developing 3 blocks north of the convention center. Nothing significant at this time, but all observation posts maintain heightened awareness for any coordination between different activity centers." The announcement provided context that transformed Cassandra's observations from isolated concerns into potential components of a coordinated threat. Protest activity could provide cover for more serious criminal activity, while multiple centers of unusual behavior might indicate planning that exceeded the capabilities of lone actors or small groups. Detective Sullivan's patrol unit requested initiated a process that would either confirm or dismiss their concerns within the next few minutes. But the developing protest situation meant that resources were becoming stretched across multiple potential threat vectors. The combination created exactly the kind of complex operational environment where small oversights could cascade into major security failures. Morrison's radio discipline improved noticeably as the tactical situation became more fluid, his federal training asserting itself in ways that demonstrated competence despite his earlier hesitation about threat escalation. His next transmission reflected growing understanding that real security work required balancing caution with decisive action. Command, Zone 7 requesting clarification on response protocols if patrol unit confirms suspicious activity at industrial site, Morrison said, his voice carrying new authority. Are we authorized to recommend tactical team deployment? The question revealed Morrison's evolution from textbook federal agent to someone beginning to understand the complexities of real-world security operations. His willingness to seek clarification rather than make assumptions showed exactly the kind of professional development that separated successful agents from those who remained trapped by their training limitations. Agent Blackwood's response demonstrated why he had achieved senior positions despite his personal limitations, his ability to make quick decisions under pressure, while maintaining political awareness that protected his career advancement prospects. Zone 7 authorized for tactical recommendation based on patrol unit findings, Blackwood replied. Keep me informed of any developments that might require resource reallocation. The authorization provided their team with both opportunity and responsibility, placing them in position to influence security operations based on their collective judgment rather than predetermined protocols. It was exactly the kind of situation that revealed whether people possessed the character to handle authority appropriately when institutional oversight was reduced. Cassandra understood that the next few minutes would determine more than just a resolution of their immediate concerns. The developing situation was creating opportunities for her military background to assert itself in ways that might compromise her carefully maintained cover story, while simultaneously placing her in position to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic security failure that had haunted her dreams for 6 years. The white panel van was still in position near the construction site entrance, its occupants still invisible behind tinted windows that prevented identification. The pattern of reconnaissance activity in the residential area had continued with mechanical precision that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. The reduced construction activity created opportunities for concealed movement that hadn't existed during normal work periods. All of these observations were beginning to form a picture that Cassandra recognized from her military experience, the signature of professional surveillance and advanced preparation that preceded complex operations. The question was whether she could communicate her concerns effectively enough to trigger appropriate response without revealing the depth of experience that informed her analysis. The patrol unit's radio transmission crackled through the tactical frequency with the kind of controlled urgency that transformed routine security operations into active threat responses. Officer Martinez's voice carried the tension of someone who had discovered something that exceeded his expectations and possibly his training to handle effectively. Metro 7 to Zone 7, we've got a problem at the industrial site. White panel van is abandoned, engine still warm. Construction site access appears to have been breached. Requesting immediate backup and tactical assessment. The confirmation of Cassandra's observations sent adrenaline surging through her system, triggering physiological responses that had been dormant for 6 years, but never truly extinguished. Her hands moved to tactical equipment with unconscious precision, checking radio frequencies and adjusting binocular settings with the muscle memory of someone who had faced similar situations when lives depended on split-second decisions. Agent Morrison's federal training asserted itself with textbook precision as he initiated emergency protocols that would escalate their local concerns into a service-wide tactical response. His voice carried new authority as he keyed the command frequency. Understanding that the situation had moved beyond individual judgment into institutional crisis management. "Command, this is Zone 7 with priority traffic," Morrison announced, his tone reflecting the gravity of confirmed threat indicators. "Patrol unit confirms suspicious activity at Meridian Industrial Complex. Abandoned vehicle, potential security. Breach, requesting immediate tactical team deployment." Agent Blackwood's response revealed both his competence under pressure and his political instincts about how security failures would affect career advancement. His decision-making process balanced tactical necessity with institutional protection, understanding that overreaction could be as damaging as inadequate response, depending on how events ultimately unfolded. "Copy Zone 7, tactical team is rolling, ETA 6 minutes. Maintain observation and report any additional activity. POTUS arrival is being delayed pending security assessment." The announcement that presidential plans were being modified, based on their team's observations, created a moment of professional satisfaction that Morrison couldn't entirely suppress. Federal agents spent their careers hoping for opportunities to demonstrate their value through decisive action, and Morrison was experiencing his first taste of genuine operational responsibility. Detective Sullivan's street cop instincts were already moving beyond celebration toward tactical reality. His attention focused on the immediate implications of confirmed threats rather than the career benefits of successful threat identification. His next transmission demonstrated the kind of practical wisdom that separated experienced law enforcement officers from those who remained trapped by theoretical training. "Metro 7 to Zone 7, patrol unit is establishing perimeter around industrial site, but we're going to need eyes on elevated positions to identify potential sniper locations. This area has too many concealed positions for ground units to cover effectively." The request for elevated surveillance placed Cassandra in exactly the position she had spent 6 years trying to avoid, forcing her to apply military expertise in a situation where institutional scrutiny would inevitably follow. Her response would determine whether she maintained her cover story or revealed capabilities that would invite investigation into her background. Through her binoculars, the Meridian Industrial Complex had transformed from routine observation target into active tactical puzzle requiring immediate solution. The abandoned panel van sat near the main entrance like evidence of planning that had proceeded beyond reconnaissance into execution phase. Construction scaffolding and crane towers created a maze of potential positions that would require systematic clearing by personnel with specialized training and equipment. Most concerning was the pattern of access routes that led from the residential area toward various points in the industrial complex, creating multiple approach corridors that would allow coordinated movement by individuals who understood urban terrain exploitation. The tactical challenge was significant enough to strain conventional law enforcement resources, but it was exactly the kind of environment that military counter-sniper teams were trained to dominate. Cassandra's analysis of the situation was occurring at multiple levels simultaneously. Her conscious mind focused on providing appropriate support to legitimate law enforcement response while her military training conducted detailed threat assessment that revealed vulnerabilities in the developing security response. The combination created internal tension between her desire to remain anonymous and her professional understanding of what needed to be done to prevent potential catastrophe. Agent Morrison's next transmission revealed his growing confidence in making tactical decisions that exceeded his previous experience, his federal training providing framework for complex operations, even if his practical experience remained limited. His request would test whether institutional resources could adapt quickly enough to address threats that didn't fit standard response categories. "Command, Zone 7 recommends immediate deployment of counter-sniper assets to elevated positions around industrial complex." Ground units cannot effectively clear all potential firing positions with an acceptable time frame. The recommendation demonstrated Morrison's evolution from textbook agent into someone beginning to understand real-world security operations, but it also revealed his lack of understanding about resource availability and deployment timelines. Counter-sniper teams required specialized personnel and equipment that might not be immediately available, creating gaps between tactical necessity and institutional capability. Agent Blackwood's response reflected the political reality of federal security operations. His awareness that requesting specialized assets created documentation trails that would later be examined by oversight committees and career review boards. His caution was both understandable and potentially dangerous, prioritizing institutional protection over tactical effectiveness. Zone 7. Counter-sniper assets are not immediately available. Continue observation and coordinate with arriving tactical team for ground-based threat assessment. The denial of specialized support created exactly the kind of capability gap that Cassandra had observed throughout her military career. Situations where institutional limitations collided with operational necessities in ways that placed lives at risk. Her decision about whether to voice additional concerns would determine whether the developing response proved adequate or catastrophically insufficient. Detective Sullivan's patrol unit continued, providing updates that painted an increasingly complex picture of the threat situation. His observations revealing evidence of professional planning that exceeded the capabilities of amateur actors or opportunistic criminals. His experience with criminal investigation was identifying patterns that suggested coordination and advanced preparation. Zone 7, we've got evidence of forced entry into multiple buildings in the complex, tool marks suggesting professional lock bypass, and what appears to be pre-positioned equipment caches. This isn't random criminal activity, this is organized operational preparation. The confirmation of professional-level threat activity elevated the situation beyond routine security concerns into potential assassination attempt, triggering federal protocols that would transform the entire presidential protection operation. Morrison's next transmission reflected his understanding that their observations had uncovered something far more serious than initial assessments had suggested. Command, Zone 7 is reporting evidence of organized threat activity, multiple breach points, pre-positioned equipment, possible assassination preparation. Recommend immediate POTUS route modification and enhanced protection protocols. Agent Blackwood's response revealed the institutional tension between security effectiveness and political considerations. His awareness that modifying presidential schedules created public relations challenges that could affect multiple agencies and career trajectories. His decision would determine whether institutional politics or security reality dominated the response to confirmed threats. Zone 7, POTUS detail is implementing enhanced protection protocols, but schedule modification requires additional confirmation of specific threat nature. Continue detailed observation and provide tactical assessment of immediate danger level. The request for additional threat specification placed Morrison in the position of making judgments that exceeded his training and experience, forcing him to rely on team members whose backgrounds might provide necessary expertise. His next action would reveal whether he possessed the humility to seek assistance or the arrogance to proceed based on inadequate knowledge. Morrison turned toward Cassandra with an expression that combined professional desperation with growing respect for her competence, understanding that the situation required expertise that his federal training hadn't provided. His request would create exactly the kind of opportunity that she had spent 6 years trying to avoid. Walker, you've been doing the most detailed observation of the industrial area. What's your assessment of immediate threat level and potential? Sniper positions? The direct request for tactical analysis forced Cassandra to choose between maintaining her cover story and providing information that could prevent catastrophic security failure. Her response would either expose her military background or leave critical threats unidentified, with consequences that could affect not just her personal safety but national security. Based on observed activity patterns and site configuration, she began carefully. We're looking at potential coordinated assault with primary sniper threat from elevated positions in the construction area. Multiple approach routes suggest team-based operation with predetermined positioning and escape corridors. The professional terminology and analytical depth of her response triggered immediate attention from both Morrison and Sullivan, their expressions revealing recognition that her competence exceeded anything her official background would suggest. Morrison's follow-up question would determine how much additional information she was willing to provide. Can you identify specific firing positions that would pose the greatest threat to presidential security? The question required Cassandra to apply military expertise in ways that would inevitably reveal her background to anyone with sufficient experience to recognize professional analysis. Her response would either maintain plausible deniability about her qualifications or demonstrate capabilities that would invite investigation into her past. Through her binoculars, she could identify at least 7 elevated positions within effective rifle range of the convention center that offered concealment, escape routes, and ballistic advantages for anyone with professional sniper training. The tactical problem was complex enough to require military-level analysis, but simple enough that competent response could neutralize the threats if implemented properly. The crane tower on the north side of the complex provides optimal sight lines with multiple escape routes, she said, her voice carrying authority that came from genuine expertise. The partially demolished warehouse offers concealment with elevation advantage, and the construction scaffolding creates numerous firing positions that would be difficult to clear without specialized personnel. Detective Sullivan's expression showed growing amazement as he recognized the depth of knowledge that Cassandra was displaying, understanding that her analysis exceeded anything that civilian security training would provide. His next comment would either protect her cover story or expose her military background to federal scrutiny. "That's exactly the kind of analysis we need," Sullivan said diplomatically. "Military experience really shows when situations get complex." The protective comment provided cover for Cassandra's expertise while acknowledging her competence, demonstrating the kind of professional loyalty that veteran law enforcement officers develop toward colleagues they respected. His intervention allowed Morrison to focus on operational necessities rather than investigating background inconsistencies. Morrison's radio crackled with an update from the tactical team that had arrived at the industrial complex, their initial assessment confirming the most serious aspects of Cassandra's threat analysis while revealing additional complications that elevated the situation into potential national security crisis. Zone 7, tactical team leader reporting multiple improvised fighting positions throughout the complex, professional-grade equipment caches, and evidence of recent occupation by trained personnel. Recommend immediate implementation of Code Red protocols. Code Red designation indicated confirmed assassination threat requiring maximum security response, triggering protocols that would mobilize every available federal resource while potentially exposing the president to exactly the kind of public scrutiny that made effective protection nearly impossible. Morrison's next decision would determine whether institutional procedures proved adequate to address threats that exceeded conventional planning assumptions. Command, Zone 7 confirms Code Red threat assessment based on tactical team findings and detailed site analysis, requesting immediate counter-sniper deployment and enhanced protection protocols. Agent Blackwood's response revealed the institutional paralysis that could affect federal operations when political considerations collided with security necessities. His awareness that Code Red implementation would trigger oversight processes that could affect multiple careers and agency relationships. Zone 7, Code Red protocols require executive authorization. Continue observation while higher authority considers appropriate response level. The delay in implementing appropriate security measures created exactly the kind of vulnerability that professional attackers were trained to exploit. Time gaps between threat identification and effective response that allowed prepared enemies to complete their missions before defensive measures could be activated. Cassandra understood that institutional procedures were creating opportunities for catastrophic failure, forcing her to choose between maintaining her anonymity and preventing exactly the kind of security disaster that had haunted her dreams. For 6 years, her decision would determine whether the day ended in successful protection or national tragedy. Through her binoculars, movement in the crane tower caught her attention with the kind of subtle shift that military training had taught her to recognize as immediate threat indicator. The figure was partially concealed by construction equipment, but the positioning and equipment profile suggested professional sniper preparation rather than legitimate construction activity. "Contact," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made similar calls in life-or-death situations. "Single individual in crane tower, appears to be establishing firing position. Range approximately 800 meters from convention center." The target identification triggered immediate response from Morrison and Sullivan, their training asserting itself in ways that demonstrated competence despite their different institutional backgrounds. Morrison's federal protocols and Sullivan's street cop instincts combined to create coordinated response that would either neutralize the threat or expose them to whatever backup plans the attackers had prepared. "Command, Zone 7 has visual contact with potential sniper in crane tower. Immediate threat to POTUS location. Requesting immediate tactical response." Agent Blackwood's voice emerged from their radios with the kind of controlled urgency that characterized federal agents when theoretical training encountered operational reality, his response reflecting both professional competence and political awareness of the consequences that would follow regardless of how the situation resolved. "Zone 7, tactical teams are moving to your location. Maintain observation and provide target guidance. POTUS motorcade is being diverted to secure location pending threat resolution." The confirmation that presidential plans were being modified based on their team's observations created a moment of professional satisfaction that was immediately overshadowed by the tactical reality of what needed to happen next. Ground-based tactical teams would require several minutes to reach effective positions, while sniper threats could be executed in seconds once targets became available. Detective Sullivan's next transmission revealed his understanding of the temporal dynamics that made their situation particularly dangerous. His street cop experience recognizing that conventional response procedures might prove inadequate to address immediate threats. "Zone 7 to tactical teams. Ground approach to crane tower will require minimum 4 minutes, but target has clear sightlines to approach routes. Recommend consideration of long-range interdiction to prevent shot opportunity." The suggestion for long-range engagement reflected Sullivan's practical understanding of tactical necessities, but it also revealed the resource limitations that affected law enforcement response to specialized threats. Counter-sniper capabilities required personnel and equipment that weren't immediately available, creating gaps between tactical requirements and institutional capacity. Morrison's response demonstrated his evolution from federal bureaucrat into someone beginning to understand operational reality, his willingness to consider options that exceeded standard procedures when lives were at stake. His next transmission would reveal whether he possessed the courage to recommend actions that might later be criticized by oversight authorities. "Command, Zone 7 recommends immediate consideration of all available options for threat neutralization. Ground approach may not be feasible within acceptable time frame." Agent Blackwood's reply reflected the institutional constraints that could paralyze federal operations. When unconventional threats required unconventional responses, his awareness that non-standard procedures created documentation trails that would be examined by oversight committees and review boards. Zone 7. Continue observation and coordinate with tactical teams. All engagement decisions will be made by appropriate authority levels. The bureaucratic response created exactly the kind of leadership vacuum that Cassandra had observed. Throughout her military career, situations where institutional procedures proved inadequate to address immediate threats while decision-makers focused on political protection rather than mission accomplishment. Through her binoculars, she could observe the sniper in the crane tower making final preparations that suggested immediate action, equipment positioning and sight picture establishment that indicated target acquisition was imminent. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly while institutional response remained constrained by procedures designed for conventional threats. Cassandra's military training was providing analysis that revealed multiple failure points in the developing security response, institutional limitations that would allow professional attackers to complete their mission despite identification and attempted interdiction. Her decision about whether to voice additional concerns would determine whether she maintained her cover story or revealed capabilities that could save lives. The weight of 6 years of anonymity balanced against the possibility of preventing exactly the kind of catastrophic failure that had destroyed her previous life, forcing her to choose between personal safety and professional duty in ways that would define her character, regardless of how the situation ultimately resolved. In the crane tower 800 meters away, the sniper was settling into final firing position, sight picture establishing on approach routes that would bring the presidential motorcade into effective range within minutes. The moment of decision was approaching rapidly, and Cassandra understood that institutional procedures would not prevent what was about to happen unless someone with appropriate skills intervened immediately. The tactical radio frequency filled with communications from various response teams as federal resources attempted to coordinate complex operations within compressed time frames, but none of the voices carried the kind of authority or expertise that would resolve the immediate threat effectively. Leadership was defaulting to procedure rather than competence, exactly the kind of institutional failure that allowed professional attackers to succeed against superior resources. Morrison's expression revealed his growing understanding that the situation exceeded his training and experience, his federal background providing framework for complex operations, but not the specific expertise required to address immediate threats. His next action would determine whether he sought assistance from team members who possessed necessary capabilities or attempted to proceed based on inadequate knowledge. "Walker," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of professional desperation that characterized good people facing situations beyond their control. "What would military protocols recommend for this situation?" The direct request for military expertise forced Cassandra to choose between maintaining her cover story and providing analysis that could prevent national catastrophe, understanding that her response would either expose her background or leave critical threats unaddressed with consequences that extended far beyond personal considerations. Cassandra's response came without hesitation. 6 years of suppressed training reasserting itself as duty overrode personal safety. Military protocols would call for immediate counter-sniper engagement, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made similar decisions when lives hung in the balance. "Ground teams won't reach effective position in time. The shot window is closing rapidly." Morrison's expression shifted from desperation to a different kind of recognition, understanding that he was hearing analysis from someone whose expertise far exceeded her official qualifications. His next question would either respect her professional judgment or demand explanations that would compromise operational effectiveness. "Do we have assets capable of making that kind of engagement?" Morrison asked, his tone reflecting growing awareness that conventional resources might prove inadequate to address the immediate threat. Detective Sullivan's voice carried grim certainty as he provided the answer that everyone already understood. Nearest counter-sniper team is 15 minutes out, assuming they can find clear firing positions once they arrive. We're looking at conventional law enforcement, trying to solve a military problem. Through her binoculars, Cassandra could observe the sniper completing final preparations, rifle position for optimal sight picture on the convention center approach routes. The weapon appeared to be a high-powered precision rifle capable of accurate fire at extended ranges. Exactly the kind of equipment that professional assassins used for operations, requiring single-shot certainty. The tactical situation was deteriorating. With mechanical precision, each passing second bringing the threat closer to execution, while conventional response procedures remained constrained by institutional limitations. Cassandra understood that preventing catastrophe would require someone with appropriate training to take immediate action, regardless of personal consequences. "There might be another option," she said quietly, her words carrying implications. That would either resolve the crisis or destroy the anonymity she had spent 6 years building. "I need to reach the roof of this building." Morrison's confusion was evident as he tried to understand how changing their observation position would address a threat that required specialized capabilities and equipment. His question revealed the gap between federal training and practical understanding of counter-sniper operations. "The roof? Walker, what are you thinking?" Sullivan's expression showed the kind of professional intuition that came from years of working with people whose backgrounds contained hidden depths. His next comment demonstrated the protective instincts that veteran law enforcement officers develop toward colleagues they respected. "Morrison, sometimes the best solutions come from people who understand problems differently than the rest of us. Let's get to the roof and see what Walker has in mind." The elevator ride to the building's roof access occurred in tense silence, each team member processing the implications of abandoning established observation posts to pursue an undefined plan that might either resolve the crisis or compromise their ability to provide tactical support. Morrison's federal training warred with his growing respect for Cassandra's competence, while Sullivan's street cop instincts suggested that unconventional problems sometimes required unconventional solutions. The roof of the Hartwell Financial building provided panoramic views of the surrounding urban landscape, including clear sight lines to the crane tower where the sniper was completing final preparations. The distance was significant, approximately 1,200 yards across complex urban terrain that would challenge even experienced marksmen under optimal conditions. Cassandra moved to the roof's eastern edge with purposeful stride, her hands automatically calculating wind speed, temperature, and atmospheric conditions that would affect long-range ballistics. The muscle memory was intact despite 6 years of suppression, mathematical calculations occurring below the level of conscious thought as her military training reasserted itself. "Walker," Morrison said carefully, "what exactly are you planning to do from up here?" Her response came while she examined the tactical situation with the systematic thoroughness that characterized professional snipers, evaluating complex shots. "I'm going to take the shot that saves the president," she said simply, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had made similar decisions in combat situations. Morrison's shock was evident as the implications of her statement became clear. Understanding that he was witnessing either a private security contractor experiencing stress-induced breakdown or someone whose capabilities far exceeded her official background. His next action would determine whether he supported an unconventional solution or attempted to prevent what might be the only option for stopping an assassination attempt. "Walker, you can't be serious. You don't have equipment, training, or authorization for that kind of engagement." Sullivan's knowing look suggested that he had suspected something like this moment might arrive. Recognition that competent people often carried capabilities that exceeded their apparent qualifications. His response would either support Cassandra's plan or force her to act without institutional backing. "Morrison," Sullivan said quietly, "sometimes people are more than they appear to be." And sometimes that's exactly what a situation requires. Cassandra was already moving toward the building's maintenance area, her knowledge of urban infrastructure guiding her to resources that might provide necessary equipment for improvised long-range engagement. Federal buildings typically contained emergency supplies and maintenance equipment that could be adapted for tactical use by someone with sufficient ingenuity and experience. The maintenance storage room contained exactly what she had hoped to find: a high-powered telescope used for building exterior inspections, maintenance tools that could provide stable shooting platform components, and emergency communication equipment that might serve tactical purposes. None of it was designed for sniper operations, but military training had taught her to improvise effective solutions from available resources. "This is insane," Morrison said as he watched her rapidly assembling an improvised sniper system from building maintenance equipment. "You're talking about taking an impossible shot with inappropriate equipment at extreme range without any kind of official authorization. Sometimes impossible shots are the only ones that matter," Cassandra replied, her hands moving with professional precision as she configured equipment that would either enable success or ensure failure. "Authorization doesn't stop bullets, competence does." Sullivan's radio crackled with updates from ground units that confirmed the deteriorating tactical situation, their reports indicating that conventional response procedures were proving inadequate to address the immediate threat within acceptable time frames. "Ground teams are still 4 minutes from Crane Tower, and the subject appears to be establishing final firing position," came the report that transformed their improvised plan from desperate measure into operational necessity. Morrison faced the kind of decision that would define his federal career, choosing between institutional procedures and operational reality in circumstances that exceeded his training and experience. His response would either support an unconventional solution or leave the threat unaddressed while conventional procedures proved inadequate. "Walker, if you miss this shot, or if you're wrong about the threat, careers will be destroyed and people will go to prison. Are you absolutely certain about what you're doing?" Cassandra's response came while she completed final adjustments to her improvised sniper system, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced similar decisions when failure meant death rather than career embarrassment. "Agent Morrison, 6 years ago I was Staff Sergeant Cassandra Montgomery, youngest woman ever accepted into the elite Presidential Protection Sniper Program. My confirmed kill record remains classified, but my qualification scores were the highest in program history until a conspiracy destroyed my career and forced me into exile." The revelation hit Morrison and Sullivan with the force of physical impact, understanding that they had been working alongside someone whose background exceeded anything they had imagined. Morrison's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and growing comprehension of what her presence might mean for resolving their crisis. "The conspiracy that framed me involved federal agents who sold classified information to enemies of the United States," she continued, her attention focused on technical preparations while providing context that explained her exile. "4 soldiers died because people in positions of trust chose money over duty. I've spent 6 years rebuilding my life, but I won't stand by while another conspiracy succeeds." Sullivan's protective instincts asserted themselves as he understood the personal risk that Cassandra was accepting by revealing her background, recognizing that successful completion of her mission would inevitably expose her to exactly the kind of scrutiny she had spent years avoiding. "Montgomery," he said, using her real name for the first time, "taking this shot will end your anonymity permanently. There's no going back to the life you've built." "Some things matter more than personal safety," she replied, settling into firing position with movements that demonstrated years of professional training. "This is what I was meant to do." Through her improvised scope, the sniper in the Crane Tower was completing final sight picture adjustments, weapon positioned for optimal engagement of targets approaching the convention center. The distance was extreme, the equipment was improvised, and the consequences of failure extended far beyond personal considerations. Morrison's radio crackled with an update that eliminated any remaining time for deliberation. Agent Blackwood's voice carrying the controlled panic of someone watching. Institutional procedures fail to address immediate threats. All stations, POTUS motorcade is approaching final checkpoint. Ground teams are not in position to neutralize crane tower threat. Seeking any available options for immediate threat resolution. The request for alternative solutions provided. Official context for unconventional action, creating space for Morrison to support a plan that exceeded federal procedures, while maintaining plausible justification for decisions that would later be examined by oversight authorities. Command, Zone 7 has potential solution for crane tower threat, Morrison announced, his voice carrying new authority as he committed himself to supporting Cassandra's mission. Implementing immediate counter-sniper engagement. Agent Blackwood's response reflected both desperation and professional skepticism, understanding that Zone 7 consisted of junior personnel who lacked specialized equipment and training for complex sniper operations. Zone 7. Clarify your capability for long-range precision engagement. This is not a training exercise. Morrison looked at Cassandra with an expression that combined professional respect with personal amazement, understanding that he was witnessing someone whose true capabilities far exceeded institutional expectations. His response would either provide necessary support or create additional obstacles to mission success. Command, Zone 7 has qualified personnel with appropriate expertise, standing by for target acquisition and engagement authorization. Through her scope, Cassandra could observe the assassin's final preparations, understanding that the shot window was measured in seconds rather than minutes. Wind conditions were marginal but acceptable, range was extreme but within theoretical. Capability and equipment limitations created variables that could only be compensated through perfect execution. Target acquired, she announced, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that characterized experienced snipers at the moment. Of truth. Range 1,200 yards, wind 8 knots from southeast, target stationary in optimal firing position. The mathematical calculations that determined shot success occurred automatically. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of training providing instant analysis of ballistic requirements. Scope adjustment, breathing control, trigger discipline. Follow through every element of professional marksmanship, aligned in preparation for a shot that would either prevent national catastrophe or mark the end of her anonymity forever. Authorization granted for immediate engagement, came Blackwood's voice, understanding that conventional options had been exhausted and unconventional solutions represented the only remaining hope for preventing assassination. Cassandra's breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that characterized professional snipers at the moment of engagement, her world narrowing to the precise calculations that separated success from failure. The improvised equipment added variables that required intuitive compensation, but the fundamental skills remained intact despite years of suppression. Sending, she whispered, the traditional sniper's announcement that preceded trigger squeeze. The shot echoed across the urban landscape with the sharp crack of high-velocity impact, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of the assassin's rifle clattering against steel construction equipment as he collapsed behind the crane towers. Protective barriers. Target down, Cassandra announced, her voice carrying professional satisfaction, tempered by understanding of what her success would cost in terms of personal anonymity. Threat neutralized. The confirmation of successful engagement triggered immediate response from ground units who had been approaching the crane tower, their tactical teams able to advance rapidly now that the immediate threat had been eliminated. Morrison's radio filled with reports of successful apprehension and evidence, recovery that would eventually reveal the scope of the conspiracy that had been prevented. Agent Blackwood's voice emerged from their radios with the kind of controlled, Amazement that characterized federal agents when theoretical impossibilities became operational realities, his response reflecting both professional gratitude and institutional curiosity about capabilities that exceeded official expectations. Zone 7, that was extraordinary shooting. Command needs immediate debriefing about personnel qualifications and engagement methodology. Morrison looked at Cassandra with an expression that combined professional admiration with personal concern, understanding that her heroic action would inevitably expose her to exactly the kind of scrutiny she had spent years avoiding. His next words would determine whether he protected her interests or prioritized institutional requirements. "Montgomery," he said quietly, "you just saved the president's life, but you also destroyed your cover story permanently. Federal agencies will want to understand how a private security contractor possessed military sniper capabilities." Sullivan's protective instincts asserted themselves as he recognized the personal cost that Cassandra had accepted to prevent national catastrophe. Understanding that heroic actions often carried consequences that extended far beyond immediate recognition. "Whatever happens next," Sullivan said firmly, "history will record that you chose duty over safety when it mattered most. That's the definition of courage." The tactical radio frequency filled with reports from various agencies as the full scope of the prevented conspiracy began to emerge through evidence recovery and suspect interrogation. Multiple attackers had been positioned throughout the area. Coordinated timing had been planned to coincide with presidential arrival, and backup plans had been prepared to ensure mission success even if individual elements failed. Director Patricia Kendall's voice emerged from the command frequency with an authority that commanded immediate attention, her presence indicating that senior federal leadership was personally monitoring the situation's resolution. Her words would determine how Cassandra's revelation would be handled by institutional authorities. "Zone 7, this is Director Kendall. I'm flying in personally to debrief the personnel responsible for preventing this assassination attempt. Outstanding work by everyone involved." The mention of Director Kendall's name triggered memories that Cassandra had thought safely buried. Recognition of the only senior officer who had believed in her innocence 6 years earlier. Her presence suggested that institutional justice might finally address the conspiracy that had destroyed her military career. Morrison's expression showed growing understanding of the historical significance of what had just occurred. Recognition that he had witnessed someone whose true story far exceeded anything his federal training had prepared him to understand. His final transmission would either protect Cassandra's interests or expose her to institutional scrutiny that might prove as dangerous as the threats she had just eliminated. "Command, Zone 7 mission complete. Request secure transportation and debriefing facilities for personnel involved in threat resolution." As sirens filled the distance and federal vehicles converged on their location, Cassandra understood that her 6 years of anonymity had ended with a single shot that would echo through history. The choice between personal safety and professional duty had proven to be no choice at all when lives depended on competence rather than institutional procedures. The woman who had failed sniper school twice had just made the shot that saved the president. But more importantly, she had chosen courage over comfort when the moment of truth arrived. Whatever consequences followed, she had finally become the person she was always meant to be. Director Kendall's helicopter was already visible in the distance, approaching rapidly with federal resources that would either provide long overdue justice or create new complications for someone whose background contained truths that institutional authorities might find inconvenient to acknowledge. The ghost in security coveralls was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true victory came not from hiding in shadows, but from standing in the light, when duty demanded excellence over safety. The sky was waiting for those brave enough to claim it, and Cassandra Montgomery had finally come home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.